universal influenza vaccine, something that would be a wonder drug that would allow a manipulated form of infant humanity to be imprinted with a vaccine that would carry with it his definition of what health was, his definition of what life was. And as recently as his annual briefing to his staff in September of 2019, on the very same eve of his illegal gathering of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, the organization of the World Health Organization, which in violation of the Sherman and Clayton Act's laws against interlocking directorates, Dr. Anthony Fauci sat not only with his own criminal conspirators, but with foreign conspirators to conspire against the United States. In that same month of September 2019, Anthony Fauci made no reference in any of his presentation to coronavirus. He made a passing acknowledgement that he had spoken at a conference where he talked about the ills of Zika virus and SARS and Ebola and all of these other things. He had no expertise, or did he? The public record of Anthony Fauci is one that says that it was all about AIDS and influenza. It was all about shoveling $191 billion of United States budget into the hands of his market-selected, preferential loyalists in industry and in academia. But there's another side of Anthony Fauci that seems to suggest that maybe there was something else going on. Maybe the HIV and influenza thing was a cover for something more insidious, because in 1999, he funded the chimeric and recombinant research that took coronavirus from rabbit cardiomyopathy. And you heard me correctly, the little fluffy bunnies. Cardiomyopathy. To first introduce the amplification of spike proteins on coronavirus, to start developing ways in which they would be more attractable into lung tissue. Amplifying the S1 spike protein and the ACE2 receptor, Dr. Ralph Baric and other co-conspiring researchers, funded by none other than National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and none other than Anthony Fauci. They began a process in 1999, which mysteriously involved researchers that were both at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and in China. The two locations that mysteriously also seemed to be the place where SARS, just a few years later, had its first outbreak. Dr. Fauci lamented, along with Dr. Ralph Baric and others, that the public wasn't interested in SARS enough to justify funding, but that didn't stop them. And in 2003, after the CDC illegally patented the genome of the SARS coronavirus isolated from humans, which, by the way, fact checkers routinely say is not the case, despite the fact that the patent on the genome itself includes all nucleic acid sequences associated with the sudden acute respiratory syndrome. In other words, it is impossible to have a SARS virus and not be subsumed within the CDC's patented definition of what the coronavirus that they patented really was. But that hasn't stopped anyone, because in 2005, it became very evident that this wonderful virus could actually be manipulated and amplified in ways that could harm humanity. And beginning in 2005, an allocation of approximately $1.7 billion per year was funneled through the hands of none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci for projects that actually were not competitive grants. They were not competitively bid. These were appropriations. These were market allocations, another criminal violation of the Sherman and the Clayton Act of the United States. Antitrust violations of interlocking directorates, antitrust violations of market allocations, antitrust violations of price fixing, antitrust allegations of the setting of non-competitive pricing, both for research and for the drugs that were developed and the research tools that were developed from this illegal activity. all of them managed by Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Anthony Fauci is not America's doctor, any more than Al Capone was America's banker. He, in fact, was and remains an individual who has a list of crimes, and I mean that in the literal sense of the word, list of crimes that would actually make Al Capone blush. Would he have had 25% of the $748 billion that has been granted to the NIH during his tenure? Would he have had the nearly $200 billion of disclosed funding? Al Capone could have done some real damage, but he was no Anthony Fauci. And Anthony Fauci had the audacity, against the backdrop of everything we've lived through over the last 4 years, of the craziness of allegations of people lying to Congress and lying to the public and doing all sorts of malfeasance. Anthony Fauci had the audacity in October of 2020 to lie to Congress again. How? Well, Congress was starting to ask questions. Where did all of that $748 billion of money go that went into the National Institutes of Health? To say nothing of the black projects and the special access programs that we've been able to uncover that have Dr. Fauci and Dr. Fauci's foreign parties also identified. That money, we have no idea what its scale is, but what we do know is that in October of 2020, when Congress asked the hard question, what's become of all this money? The answer was a lie. In the 21 patents listed by the Department of Health and Human Services GAO report to Congress, only 8 of the 21 legally comply with the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980, in which investigators who receive federal funds have to disclose the nature of those funds, and they have to disclose the U.S. government's interests in the resulting intellectual property and technology. 8 of the 21 disclosed actually have a compliant disclosure within the patent filing. 13 failed to disclose, in violation of U.S. law, failed to disclose the U.S. government's interest. And that only leads to a few $1 billion a year of lost revenue for that little oversight. But let's take a look a little deeper, because it turns out that there are 40 patents associated with drugs that currently are actually grossing in the market, according to Medicare and Medicaid statistics, respectively $2.3 billion a year, $456 million a year, $500 million or more per year. These drugs that are actually in the market derived from 40, you heard me correctly, undisclosed patents that were never mentioned in the GAO report to Congress, never mentioned in any disclosure of any financial performance or any financial benefit flowing back to NIAID. 40 patents generating somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $5 billion per year, many of them for now over a decade, never once disclosed to Congress. Now, maybe that's an oversight. Maybe Dr. Anthony Fauci is, in addition to not being America's doctor and being a failed researcher in HIV vaccines and his failed aspirations to go after the infant imprint on a universal influenza vaccine, in addition to all of his other epic failures, maybe he's a bad manager. Maybe he doesn't know how to keep track of billions and billions of dollars of research. And I guess when you've been handed $191 billion and you've squandered all of it, maybe we shouldn't be surprised at a few billion missing here and a few billion missing there. Or should we be concerned? Well, the answer is that when the media of the United States, when public health authorities, when governors, when heads of state around the world are relying on an individual who has habitually lied since 1984, who has habitually hidden evidence, who has habitually made repeated statements that are false and misleading. When you have that individual sitting at the helm of an organization charged with protecting and safeguarding the health of humanity, it's helpful to realize that Dr. Anthony Fauci is not a crusader for humanity. He's a crusader for a very dark story, where he has appropriated the work of the National Science Foundation, not only not NIH, not only not Department of Health and Human Services, he's appropriated the work of the National Science Foundation to actually come up with a way to regenerate life on Earth. Now, last time I checked, we have life. We have it, and it's working. So one has to ask the question, why would Dr. Anthony Fauci lean on a company called Moderna? A company that was started in 2010 by an escapee from one of those National Science Foundation grants, a National Science Foundation grant that had the following title: Darwinian Chemical Systems. The National Science Foundation grant that was charged with figuring out how to start living systems from scratch. Don't take my words. Their goal: to enable RNA to form in protocells without a primer template strand. Dr. Anthony Fauci is not just not Dr. Jekyll, not just not Mr. Hyde. Dr. Anthony Fauci is the front man for a view that says that we, the people, are expendable in the pursuit of the self-interest of the moneyed elite and the moneyed few. And we, the people, can see in his own words, in his own hand, and in his own evidence that Dr. Anthony Fauci is committed to the destruction, not the advancement of human life. Anyone who is willing to rob the dying of their privilege of dying with loved ones, anyone who is actually willing to say that holidays shouldn't be celebrated, anyone who believes that humanity should in fact rebreathe the air that they're rebreathing for the insidious objective of ultimately getting to pulmonary pathogens, which in 2020, at its annual meeting, the NIAID decided to fund a project on fungal infections caused by respiratory distress. Your mask is not protecting you. It's getting you ready for Dr. Fauci's next experiment.
On behalf of our center and our partners, the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our audience here in New York, as well as our larger virtual audience participating online today. The Event 201 scenario is fictional. Today's scenario is going to simulate meetings of a multi-stakeholder group called the Pandemic Emergency Board.
We're at the start of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic. And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together.
There's been some conspiracy theories that are around about the potential that pharmaceutical companies or the UN have released this for their own benefit.
And maybe this is a time for us to showcase some cases where we are able to bring forward some bad actors and leave it before the courts to decide whether there's some fake news.
A new coronavirus. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia.
In related news, a significant demand for personal protective equipment like N95 masks and gloves are on the rise. Patients are overwhelming healthcare facilities. People are avoiding public spaces out of fear of infection and in compliance with public health recommendations. Our U.S. affiliate has just released polling results on public expectations for a vaccine, and 65% of those polled are eager to take the vaccine, even if it's experimental.
I am not optimistic about having a vaccine in time to be relevant during this pandemic.
With enough money and political will, anything is possible.
Penalties have been put in place for spreading harmful falsehoods, including arrests.
If the solution means controlling and reducing access to information, I think it's the right choice.
What exactly are the risks and benefits of staying home from work? Absolutely, we need to save lives, but we literally cannot afford a heavy-handed response that suffocates our economy.
The world saw large-scale protests and in some places riots. This led to violent crackdowns in some countries and even martial law. The public lost trust in their respective administration. Economists say the economic turmoil caused by such a pandemic will last for years. The societal impacts, the loss of faith in government, the distrust of news, and the breakdown of social cohesion could last even longer. We have to ask, did this need to be so bad?
On May 4th, 2020, as part of a documentary series called Plandemic, I released an interview featuring science whistleblower, Dr. Judy Mikovits. The interview received fierce backlash for spreading what the media declared dangerous conspiracy theories. As a father and a veteran media producer, there was no way that I would release harmful information into the world during a moment as vulnerable as now. I had known Dr. Judy for 2 years before filming her interview. I read her book, then thoroughly researched and vetted her story. After interviewing her legal team, former colleagues, and people who have known her for decades, one thing I can say without question is, Judy Mikovits is one of the most honest, caring, and courageous women I've ever known. Why then would the most powerful forces of big tech, politics, media, and medicine go to such extreme measures to silence her voice all over the world? And why did all of the debunkers invest so much ink and airtime defaming Dr. Judy's character while avoiding very real revelations pertaining to patents, conflicts of interest, and the deadly corruption pervading our global health organizations? To get to the bottom of these questions, as well as many others, I've spent the last several weeks interviewing scholars from all over the world, among them top doctors, distinguished scientists, and Nobel laureates. I also sat down with Dr. Judy for a follow-up interview and to give her the opportunity to respond to critics. You can see that full interview on the Plandemic website. While you're there, make sure to dive down the rabbit hole, where you'll find additional videos, documents, and scientific studies that support the claims and perspectives put forth in the Plandemic series. Here are a few highlights from my follow-up interview with Dr. Judy. What do you have to say to the people who have tried to minimize your involvement with HIV by stating that you were at the bottom of the totem pole, 13th author of a 13-member group of scientists?
Well, the 13th author is the senior author, so that means they're the most important author.
Why did you agree to retract your own XMRV paper?
The paper was actually force retracted. I was actually being held in jail.
You told me that you had financial offers to remain silent.
If you simply say you made a mistake and promise never to say another word, you can keep everything. You'll get all of your grants. You'll get everything back, millions of dollars. You'll get publication and funding. My lawyer said, that's the best offer you're going to get. I said, you don't understand me. I don't need an offer. I've already lost everything. If I thought even one child or one grandma was injured or killed because I didn't do something, that would have ended my life as I know it. There was no money you could ever pay me to get me to cover this up. I will never stop telling the truth.
I'm the developer of Linguistic Genomics, which was the first platform on which you could determine the intent of communication rather than the literal artifact of communication. But we've also used that technology for a number of other applications in defense and intelligence and finance, and most notably, in the early 2000s, my company was responsible for bringing down what was, at the time, one of the largest tax frauds in U.S. history. We maintained a series of inquiries into every individual, every organization, and every company that is involved in anything that either blurs the line of biological and chemical weapons or crosses that line in any of 168 countries. In 1999, there were 1 million patents digitized by IBM. And those 1 million patents were the first time human innovation had been put into an electronic digital searchable format. We took that information and we did a very simple exercise using our linguistic genomics technology, where I made the horrific assessment that approximately 1/3 of all patents filed in the United States were functional forgeries, meaning that while they had linguistic variations, they actually covered the same subject matter. In 1999, patents on coronavirus started showing up, and thus began the rabbit trail.
March 2003, panic grips Hong Kong as a deadly new virus sweeps through the city.
In 2003, the Center for Disease Control saw the possibility of a gold strike, and that was the coronavirus outbreak that happened in Asia. They saw that a virus they knew could be easily manipulated was something that was very valuable, and in 2003 they sought to patent it. And they made sure that they controlled the proprietary rights to the disease, to the virus, and to its detection, and all of the measurement of it. We know that Anthony Fauci, that Ralph Baric, that the Center for Disease Control, and the laundry list of people who wanted to take credit for inventing coronavirus were at the hub of this story. From 2003 to 2018, they controlled 100% of the cash flow that built the empire around the industrial complex of coronavirus.
The World Health Organization has officially named the novel coronavirus
the novel coronavirus outbreak.
The World Health Organization has declared
an international public health emergency.
While we know that the coronavirus manipulation started with Dr. Ralph Baric in 1999.
The major characteristics of SARS, MERS, and SARS coronavirus 2, it's a good way.
Ralph Baric is the researcher at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who's famous for his chimeric coronavirus research. In 2002, there was a recognition that the coronavirus was seen as an exploitable mechanism for both good and ill. On April the 25th, 2003, the U.S. Center for Disease Control filed a patent on the coronavirus transmitted to humans. Under 35 U.S. Code Section 101, nature is prohibited from being patented. Either SARS coronavirus was manufactured, therefore making a patent on it legal, or it was natural, therefore making a patent on it illegal. If it was manufactured, it was a violation of biological and chemical weapons, treaties, and laws. If it was natural, filing a patent on it was illegal. Then either outcome, both are illegal. In the spring of 2007, the CDC filed a petition with the Patent Office to keep their application confidential and private.
They actually filed patents on not only the virus, but they also filed patents on its detection and a kit to measure it. Because of that CDC patent, they had the ability to control who was authorized and who was not authorized to make independent inquiries into coronavirus. You cannot look at the virus, you cannot measure it, you cannot develop a test kit for it. And by ultimately receiving the patents that constrained anyone from using it, they had the means, they had the motive, and most of all, they had the monetary gain from turning coronavirus from a pathogen to profit.
Developing and owning a coronavirus vaccine has become a biotech arms race with political overtones.
This vaccine gold rush is starting to bother me. Gold rush. Let's keep that in mind.
And so somewhere between 2012 and 2013, something happened. The federal funding for research that was feeding into places like Harvard, Emory, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that funding suddenly became impaired by something that happened at the NIH, where the NIH got this little tiny moment of clarity and said, I think something we're doing is wrong. And in 2013, the NIH said, gain-of-function research on coronavirus should be suspended. The National Institutes of Health had a moral and social and potentially legal reason to object to research. But the letters that were sent to the researchers essentially said, you are receiving notice that we're telling you to stop. And now on the bottom of the page, we're going to clarify what stop means. Keep going. But when the heat gets hot in 2014 and 15, what do? You offshore the research. You fund the Wuhan Institute of Virology to do the stuff that sounds like it's getting a little edgy with respect to its morality and legality. But do you do it straight way? No. You run the money through a series of cover organizations to make it look like you're funding a U.S. operation, which then subcontracts with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The U.S. could say, China did it. China could say, the U.S. did it. And the cool thing is, both of them are almost telling the truth.
Where did the coronavirus come from? There is a new investigation into its origins. U.S. intelligence officials tell NBC News that they are examining whether the virus accidentally came from a Chinese lab.
Chinese officials pushing back against that claim on Thursday, tweeting that it might be the U.S. Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan.
I was the first person in the world to look at an epidemic and study its characteristics and prove that it was due to biological warfare and was not a natural occurrence. So I published that 28 years ago. Early in this pandemic, I did not think the coronavirus was a natural occurrence from bats. I feel quite convinced that this was a laboratory-designed organism. There have been hundreds and hundreds of leaks from high-containment laboratories that do research on pathogenic coronaviruses and other potentially lethal organisms. I was particularly interested in a paper that came out in Nature Medicine by 5 scientists claiming that it was definitely a natural occurrence rather than a lab construct. But the arguments they used did not hold water. They didn't really make a lot of scientific sense. And yet all kinds of very important people started parroting what this paper said. And so that, of course, got me scratching my head saying, why are these people risking their reputation when it's obviously illogical, doesn't hold water? Somebody must have made them publish this, and somebody must have told these other people that they have to say it's a great piece of science.
You were quoted as saying it was a meticulous job done professionally.
It could be done by somebody very expert in molecular biology, I think.
Et c'est pas naturel, c'est ce que vous voulez dire?
Non, ce n'est pas naturel, c'était un travail de professionnel, un travail de biologiste moléculaire. C'est un travail très minutieux. On peut dire d'horloger, on peut dire au niveau des séquences.
Mais dans quel but?
Dans quel but, ça n'est pas clair. Moi, j'expose, si vous voulez, mon travail, c'est d'exposer les faits, c'est tout.
See, the problem with all of this is the evidence is right in front of our face. And when confronted with evidence, we are told fact checkers are somehow transcendent.
The pace of our modern world makes it nearly impossible for working people to research the events and policies that shape their lives. When seeking answers to life's most pressing questions, where do we go first? Google. Enter the subject, hit go, and there it is. Only what they want us to see. In today's culture of copy and paste journalism, it's common for hundreds of unrelated outlets to feature the exact same report. This is not the result of laziness. This is by design. When we see identical headlines across seemingly unrelated platforms, the logical mind concludes, well then, it must be true. The illusion that numerous news sources have arrived at the same conclusion gives us confidence to share the chosen narrative. And just like that, we become the unwitting pushers of propaganda. Search engines are the holy grail for those seeking to control the narrative.
Google is already more powerful in terms of its control over people's lives than almost every government on the planet.
As the most influential search engine in the world, through its ubiquitous reach, Google has more power to influence U.S. elections than any foreign nation.
You testified before this. You said in subsequent elections, Google and Facebook and Twitter and big text manipulation could manipulate as many as 15 million votes in a subsequent election.
And the methods that they're using are invisible, they're subliminal, they're more powerful than most any effects I've ever seen in the behavioral sciences, and I've been in the behavioral sciences for almost 40 years.
The blacklists is something that Google said didn't exist, and they testified that under oath.
And nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. Now, me as an engineer, I just did a search on Google's internal search engine, and guess what I found? It had blacklisted search terms like cancer cures. Why is Google deciding what people can and cannot search for?
What was once an efficient tool for navigating the world of information is now a network for global surveillance, data collection, and social engineering. Now let's take a look at a few of the most commonly used fact checkers, beginning with Snopes. The husband and wife duo of David and Barbara Mickelson founded Snopes.com in 1995. They had no journalism background or training whatsoever. They built their fact-checking empire by using Google as their primary verifying source. The Mickelsons divorced in 2015. Barbara sued David for embezzling money that he allegedly spent on prostitutes, as well as a lavish honeymoon with his new wife, who worked as an escort in Las Vegas before joining the Snopes cast of characters. In 2017, David Mickelson's new business partners filed a lawsuit accusing Mickelson of multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Snopes proclaimed to be the internet's go-to source for discerning what is true and what is total nonsense. Yet one glance at their history of fact-free checking tells another story. When Dr. Mikovits claimed she was arrested without a warrant and jailed without a charge, Snopes
So my phone is about to shut off, so I gotta power it, so I gotta switch. Can y'all hear me? Anybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so the phone's been on for so long, it's at the end of its power, so I had to stop. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to think I should conclude today's events, but I refuse to let y'all leave without let me see if I can switch to this phone. Hold on. Unmute this one. Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right, so I switched to the iPhone, and I would like to end this. This was a good good room. This was a great room tonight. A lot of information. Everybody go up to the link, hit that, download the Fauci dossier. It is critical that